There's nothing quite as comforting as gathering around with mom friends and sharing stories. Stories have a way of making us feel better, and they're great reminders that no family is perfect, and that's okay. So join us as we share some stories and laugh, learn, and grow together. It's the iMom Podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the iMom Podcast. Megan, Chloe, Susan, and I'm Abby. We are all here with you once again this week to talk about preparing our children for the path versus preparing the path for our children. I don't know if have you guys ever heard that saying before?
Yeah.
All right. So basically are we making sure that every step they take is perfectly manicured and safe, or are we actually giving them the tools that they need to walk and to make sure that path works for them? So Megan, you sent us all a video a couple of days ago of a good word that you got. Can you kind of share that with us?
Yeah. So if you live in Nashville, I would highly recommend going to this. But when I lived there, I used to go to a Bible study. And I can't remember the name of the church right now, but the lady who does it, her name is Paige Brown, and she's been doing it for years. And she's just a very gifted teacher. And now you can sign up to get her notifications and you can watch it remotely now. She doesn't leave them up permanently, so you have to kind of follow along while it's going on. And she studies a book of the Bible at a time. So right now she was studying Daniel, and she walks everyone through the book, and it's just king after king in Daniel. He is captive, and he is held captive by all these different kings. They never let him out of captivity. And so he is he's at the king's whim, and he lives so long that he lives through multiple kings' reigns. And so each king kind of persecutes him in different ways or has him perform different miracles, things like that. And one of the things that Paige said, and I'm probably not going to say it as eloquently as she said, was because Daniel was so firm in his faith, and he was so firm in who he was and what his purpose was and what his goal was, is that through each of these different reigns, he was never intimidated by these kings. He never bent to their whim if he was told to worship them or to worship their gods. He stood so firm in who he was, and he knew what his purpose was. And he just had that very clear vision. And so instead of teaching our kids what not to do, and because they could have said, oh Daniel, don't do what the king says, don't do this, don't do that. God didn't even have to tell him not to do this or that, because Daniel was so focused on what he was there to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what she said was, how are we preparing our kids for what they should be doing and teaching them the right things and instilling the right things in them, instead of just trying to keep all these external things from coming at them. So how are we teaching them the good things instead of trying to control the external input that they're receiving from everywhere else?
Yeah. I think that when I watched that video, my first thought was, there is no way I can control everything that my kids are going to encounter. I can name 100 things that I think that they're going to have to face, but there's 100 other things that aren't even in existence yet. Probably my parents wouldn't have ever thought that my kids were going to have to deal with AI, like what is that to them? So it will completely overwhelm you if you think about controlling all of the things versus what you're saying, Megan, versus feeding your child the tools and the foundation that they need to face whatever those things are.
Yeah. Well, and it convicted me because I realized, having little kids, I'm constantly making sure that they're not jumping off the swing set or hitting each other or whatever. And I'm constantly telling them be careful, or no, don't do that. Instead of stopping to teach them why they shouldn't hit their brother, or why they need to, learn these Bible verses, or why they need to learn X, Y, and Z, instead of just telling them, no, don't do that.
Well, and I think that actually is a really good first kind of talking point. If we're going to prepare our kids, we have to be willing to take the time to do it. It's really easy to tell your child, don't jump off that curb or don't hit your brother, but it takes more time and more intention to tell them why. But telling them why is what will stick.
And sometimes you're right, it takes a long time, because the best way to tell them is say, so I see you're about to jump off the couch. Let's talk about that. why might that be a good idea or a bad idea?
Mm-hmm.
And make them really think it out.
Yeah.
Oh, I could accidentally jump on my baby brother and break his leg. You know, like, let's talk about it. Conversations take time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, taking it even a step further, I think it's so important when they get older and they're like in their teen years and college years and adult years of, if everyone's doing one thing, but you don't feel like it's the right thing for you to do, how do you stand firm and know that you're making the right decision because you know who you are and what you believe, and that's the right decision for you to do, even if it's going against everything that everyone else is doing, and they're, saying like, well, why, this is all what we're doing. Why are you doing this? And I just think too, in a culture where there's we're being constantly bombarded by media and culture and influencers telling us to do this and that and what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And, I feel like you're just constantly getting hit with different people's opinions. And so how do you think through it and process through it and critically think like, is this something that I think is good? Or is this just something that culture is telling me is good?
Well, don't you think when you go into your marriage and then parenting, Susan, you've written about it before, knowing your purpose in parenting, knowing what your big things are, like what are the things that are most important to you as a mom? And then you go off of those things and say, all right, as I'm raising my children, I need to constantly be reinforcing loving the Lord, being empathetic, having grit, whatever those things are that you have named as your big three.
Yeah.
And use those.
We talk about goal setting so much at work and everything and having that North Star. Here's where we're going. We're here and we want to end up here. We don't do it with our parenting. And you only have 18 years to hit your target. So if you want them to walk away from your family, not that they're walking away, but, going to college or like Megan said, getting, becoming independent, then you have to know I'm working toward that goal of instilling in my child everything they need to be successful when they leave our house. And that will start to help you decipher, this is not important, this is not important, this is not important. And I have to tell you, with different kids, I talk about this in the Passionate Mom book, every child is different. You may have to work on them understanding one principle that's a totally different thing that another child needs.
Yeah.
But yes, you have to prepare them for the path because you don't get to choose their path.
You do kind of have to prepare the path when they're little and as they grow. So like you're going to baby proof the house. You're not going to just say, don't stick a penny in the outlet. Their brain is not, capable of understanding or remembering that. As they get older, you have to start backing off from that. And I think that a lot of moms end up like really wanting to stay in the previous stage.
It's a pyramid, not a funnel. So think of that triangle. You have more control when they're little, and you want to give them more control the older they get. So you have to start working. If you are like a really, laid back parent maybe, and you just let your little kids do anything, don't be surprised when they hit 13, if they're used to doing anything and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, that's dangerous. You have to start, it's teaching critical thinking. It's teaching, self-discipline, self-control. Is the older they get, they have to have more. And like Megan said, it's building in them that confidence of, oh, this is what I do. This is right and wrong. I see the difference. Or it's especially hard for impulsive kids. You got to teach them more, slow down, think, take 10 before you make any decisions. So every child is different, but it is.
Well, and I think what's scary for our generation of parents, and when I say ours, like, I guess it's millennial and Gen Z, is that our kids will grow up with social media from day one. I mean, they won't have access to social media that early, but if they're being influenced by all these other people, I want to make sure I teach them things first before they hear it from some random influencer on TikTok or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I want to control that narrative, but instead of me trying to say like, no, you can't have social media, I want to now start instilling those things in them so that when they get to that stage, they can see things and be like, that's garbage or whatever it might be. That's silly.
Well, and you cannot know all of the things they're going to see on social media. You can't say, well, I don't think I believe in getting lip injections, or I don't think that we do this or that. Like all the different things they're going to see on social media, you cannot predict what that is. And so again, you have to come back to, I believe that God made you beautiful the way you are, or whatever that thing is for you. Maybe you do believe in lip injections. I don't care. But again, you just have to go back to those fundamentals and teach them those, because then they're going to see what they see and they know what you've given them.
I'm going to give a really simple example of, how it can be something not that you're protecting them from either. So if you were taking a walk with your 2-year-old and they went and picked a flower from your neighbor's yard, you would go, oh, thank you. In the future, you would just hold their hand so they couldn't pick your neighbor's flower. You're controlling the path. If they're 5 or 6 and they go pick a flower from your neighbor's yard, you're going to say, that is so sweet. That's really kind. But you know what? This is Mrs. Sidman's flowers, and she grew them particularly for their family or the neighbors to look at and enjoy. In the future, you really should pick flowers only from our yard too. Not the child didn't really do anything terrible. This is not a dangerous situation, but you're teaching them to think about other people's property, which is just something they're going to need to know.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as that. I'm just saying it's constant conversations, building that moral warehouse, ability to think critically.
Yeah. One thing that stood out in that video to me was when she talked about Daniel and his name being changed, and that he's like, these are not his words, obviously, but I don't care what my name is. I don't care what I'm being called. I think that it speaks to when you lay that foundation for your kids, they don't have to fight unnecessary battles. When they know what matters the most, they know who they serve. They know what's most important. Some things, this is fleeting. This is not a big deal. And I think that we all could really benefit from doing that ourselves, and just knowing what's worth.
Yeah. Fast forward to the teenager in that same example. They know, hey, we're going to go do donuts on somebody's lawn. They're going to say, no, I don't do that because they've got a lot of care on that lawn, and they're going to tear up their flowers, and they go. So it just carries into the future forever.
Yeah. But for the moms that are trying to control all these situations and running themselves ragged, what do you think is really the motivation behind that? Is it protecting their kids from pain?
We want our kids to have this just sweet fairy tale life. We want to protect them. It's hard when they, hurt themselves, or, if you've told your son not to jump off the couch 100 times, it's because you don't want him to skin his knee and cry. But at the same time, sometimes they have to, some kids learn through action. So we can't protect them from everything.
And I think that some of the most important lessons that we have all learned come through failure, mistakes, injury. Yeah. So what do you think is that well-rounded child? What are the things that you put up there at the top for preparing your child?
I mean, we worked on that moral warehouse a lot. Like, do they have that warehouse within them that when they need to find an answer, they can pull out the right one because they've thought through those types of things enough? Because every situation is going to change. So they have to pull from within.
I asked my sons a couple weeks ago, I said, what does God's voice sound like? And their answers were really funny and like all over the place. But just asking that, I think also helps trigger that, okay, God is going to tell me what is right and what is wrong here. And I need to pause and listen. I think that's important. I think critical thinking, you said that a little bit earlier, Susan, but being able to think critically, especially when it comes to AI and things that they see online, I think that cannot be overstated.
Yeah. I think with their peers too, because they have to be able to forecast what the outcome is going to be of a certain situation. Like crazy idea, a bunch of teens, they get this idea, critically thinking, okay, but if we do that, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to kind of going on that too is, how is it going to affect other people? Actually earlier today, I was explaining the difference to James between selfish and selfless. And so I was kind of explaining him that being selfless is putting someone else first before your needs and, letting them play with the toy first or whatever it might be. And so I also think it's, how is this going to affect the closest people around you? How can you honor them and put them first and think about their needs before your own and before you take action?
Mm-hmm. I do feel like with just the way social media is now, like it's really easy to lose sight of critical thinking because anyone can post anything and say, I'm an expert, or not say they're an expert, and people still follow it. Like I came across this viral TikTok of this woman that was like, if your baby isn't sleeping, have you tried this hack? And she literally flips her baby like a 360. And then that's the end of the video.
Like foot over head?
Yeah, like a somersault almost. And I'm like, what? Like that was so weird.
What happens when you drop the baby?
No, literally.
They do sleep.
It was and then later I saw that like a pediatric sleep consultant I followed stitched that video, reposted it, and was like, show me the science. But that video, the original video, I mean, had hundreds of thousands of, views and engagements on it. So it's like,
too late.
Really, I mean, we're letting people say anything and we're giving them the credit. So
yeah, I think that one aspect of preparing my children that is important to me, because I have been really bad about it, is being okay with failure and not letting fear of failure paralyze me. It's really hard to take steps forward when you're afraid of making the wrong move. And I was talking with one of the guys on our staff, Buck, and he said that his son did his science project and the science project failed. And the kid was like, I don't want to present this. I'm not going to go to the science fair with this science project. And Buck was like, no, you're going to still take your little trifold board and you're going to put it up. And his project won. And he's like, it's because it's a science fair project and that is part of science. It's an experiment and you learn from it. And I thought, what a great life lesson about actually keeping on with what you're doing. It might fail, but you're going to learn something. You're going to come back with new data. You're going to realize, he said, part of the reason that his project failed is because he started it too late, which I'm like, what kid doesn't start a science project too late? Like who didn't do it the night before?
Literally.
But there are some things in that science project, like a plant is not going to grow any faster than what, it is going to grow. You cannot control that. But what you can control is when you started the project. And so the idea of failing is a blessing. It is such a good thing that we have. I think that we're trying to control situations because we're afraid of failure, but we're really sabotaging our kids by not letting them fail. So prepare your kid that way. Let them fail. Any final thoughts, ladies?
And when you let them fail, be on the other end to have a conversation of things they could have done differently and analyze that. Because I do think that's sometimes where we miss the boat too. Sometimes our kids fail and they don't tell us. And then we can't say, well, gosh, what could you have done? Let's think through this.
And the thing that I always try to remember, and I'm not going to say it as articulately as it was first said, but it's something like, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. If we want our 40-year-old child to act like a 10-year-old or to deal with things like a 10-year-old would, then keep on making life easy for him. You have to prepare them to be adults, not to be oversized children. All right, let us know what you think. Chime in on Instagram, and thank you so much for listening. Thanks for listening to the iMom podcast. iMom is the motherhood program of the nonprofit organization Family First. Along with our fatherhood program, All Pro Dad, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the iMom Minute, by going to imom.com/subscribe and get tons of great ideas, insight, and inspiration. The iMom podcast is hosted by me, Abby Watts, along with Susan Merrill, Megan Tigner, and Chloe Blumenthal.